Heroin. It's been alleged that nearly two-thirds of the heroin consumed in the United States has been processed by mafia middlemen in Sicily. In return comes money, mounds of it. The Italian government is trying to cut this lucrative trade route, and today in Palermo, as Richard Roth tells us, a landmark Italian trial ended with mass convictions.
There is a war in Sicily, and in the past year and a half, it has killed 200 people. The dead are the victims of a savage struggle within the mafia over territory and profit in the drug trade. Italian authorities say the defendants who showed up this morning for the last day of one of several trials underway in a Palermo courthouse are the strategists of the war, the processors and couriers and accountants for millions of dollars worth of heroin which each year passes through Sicily en route to the United States. These men were convicted of processing almost 200 pounds of heroin through kitchen-like laboratories in Sicily, then smuggling it on commercial jets to New York. The recipients, say Italian police, were American relatives controlling the mafia's drug trade in the U.S. It made the drug traffic much easier, says prosecutor Giusto Scacitano, having a family connection handle the American side of the business.
It has made it easy as well to send the business profits back here to Sicily for investment. And authorities say that's exactly what's happened.
More than 100 new bank branches have opened in Sicily in the past 2 years. Financial records, unlike human witnesses, can't be frightened into silence. So using a tough new law to examine bank accounts and tax returns, officials now are following the money trail. According to judges, 80% of Palermo's prosperous construction industry is run by the mafia, financed through drug sales. Italian intelligence chief Emanuele De Francesco, put in charge of combating the mafia last year after his predecessor was murdered, says 500 people have been charged over the past 8 months in a nationwide crackdown on organized crime. Italian and American law enforcement officials speak now of measured progress, but say they are still a long way from controlling the drug traffic through Sicily or the mafia's monopoly on fear. Not even the church has been immune to that. In April, 5 months after Pope John Paul had joined outspoken Palermo Archbishop Salvatore Pappalardo in denouncing mafia crime, the Archbishop was supposed to celebrate Mass at Palermo's main prison. The inmates refused to attend, and the service was canceled. Now, according to diplomatic sources, Pappalardo is quietly asking the Vatican for a new job elsewhere. Richard Roth, CBS News, Palermo.
Law enforcement officials today announced what they call their biggest case yet in cracking a drug ring tied to organized crime and that funneled drugs from Italy through a chain of U.S. pizza parlors. Rita Braver reports.
The government says the operation was masterminded by Sicilians and brought $1,650 million worth of heroin into the United States over the past 5 years. The alleged American kingpin was Salvatore Toto Catalano, linked by the government to organized crime and owner of this bakery and pizza restaurant in Queens. In fact, so many of the dealings in this case took place in pizza parlors that federal officials have dubbed it the Pizza Connection. To try to avoid detection, it's charged the Sicilians sent the drugs to family members who owned pizza parlors in 5 small Midwest cities. The drugs were then driven to New York and from there distributed to major metropolitan areas. Using legitimate brokerage houses and banks as well as couriers, the money was allegedly laundered through Swiss bank accounts.
A process of heavy intelligence efforts, the use of the most sensitive lawful techniques, made possible the identification of a new group of Sicilian nationals participating with traditional La Cosa Nostra groups in the United States.
Federal officials say the group charged today controls so much of the U.S. heroin market that a long-sought government goal could be reached, a reduction of the amount of heroin available on the street. Rita Braver, CBS News, New York.
While Walter Mondale was unveiling his anti-drug campaign today, the Reagan administration continued to gloat over its efforts at cracking a heroin smuggling ring operating in Italy and the U.S. At a press conference in Washington today, Attorney General William French Smith said a new pattern of cooperation had been established with Italian authorities. This past weekend, Italian prosecutors issued warrants for the arrest of 366 people in a major crackdown on the Sicilian mafia. Here in the United States, the Justice Department ordered the arrest of 28 Americans and Italians wanted by Italian authorities. Some 18 were taken into custody yesterday, and 10 others are being sought. One man who played a central role in the crackdown here in this country is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Rudolph Giuliani. Mr. Giuliani, was this predominantly Italian police work which led to the arrests in this country, or American police work?
Well, this actually has been a long investigation that's gone on over a year, and it is truly a joint investigation involving the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Italian police, and United States Attorney's offices, including my own and the United States Attorney's office in Brooklyn. It was a joint operation. Back in April, we arrested some 28 people, most of whom were members of the Sicilian Mafia in what we call the Pizza Connection case here in the United States.
This is where it was alleged that pizza stores were being used as a front for...
Correct. Of the 28 people that the Italian police asked us to arrest in the United States over the weekend, 22 of those were charged in that case.
I see.
And we have...
In other words, you'd already discovered their connection.
That's correct. And over the summer, we have spent a great deal of time working together. At any one time, we've had as many as 15 or 16 Italian prosecutors and magistrates working in my office with evidence that we have discovered, and we've sent assistant United States attorneys over to Rome and Palermo. We have one there right now to work with them. So we've developed both these cases together.
Is this the first time that Italians and American law enforcement agencies have worked that intimately together on the Mafia?
Yes, and the emphasis has to be on that, on that closely together. We've worked together before, but never for a one-year period, and almost really as a joint strike force dealing with the Mafia problem on their side of the Atlantic and the Mafia problem on our side of the Atlantic.
Would this, I mean, U.S. authorities have been trying to crack down on the Mafia for decades, but would this have been possible before the recent Italian governments made the decision to really crack down? Is this something that's arisen out of that new determination?
That is one of the factors. I'd say there are 4 or 5 principal factors, and one of those is that the Italian government, I think, had just had enough of the violence, which had really begun to become more like terrorism rather than organized crime. Some 10 or 11 Italian magistrates and prosecutors have been killed by the Sicilian Mafia in the last 3 or 4 years. And Attorney General Smith took advantage of their willingness by going there and negotiating with the Minister of Justice and the Minister of the Interior, and worked out an arrangement whereby we work in teams with them in putting these cases together.
Are more arrests expected in this country?
I think a great deal more is going to flow from this. One of the principal things that's happened in the last couple of months is that Tommaso Buscetta, who was a principal figure in the Sicilian Mafia, is now cooperating with Italian authorities, and we fully expect with American authorities. And the information that he can give us really is on a dimension at least equal to Joe Valachi.
Joe Valachi, who was a principal government witness in the hearings, the Senate hearings.
That's correct.
Of the 60s, early
That's
60s. Right. Is Mr. Buscetti going to be brought back to this country to give evidence here?
I can't reveal that yet for security reasons as to whether he'd be coming back and exactly how he would be coming back. But what I can say is that we have a working arrangement with the Italian authorities whereby we're sharing all of this information. And if he's needed to prosecute cases in the United States, there's no doubt that the Italian government will make him available, as we have made witnesses available to the Italian government to prosecute their cases.
Now, you've said, and you've said it was a revelation, that what this showed is that there was an entire new, I've forgotten the word, wing or group of the Mafia operating here that you didn't know anything about before. Could you describe that and its significance?
I'll try to be very specific about it, because we did know a lot about Sicilian operations in the United States. What we did not know until about a year ago when we began this investigation, and we began doing wiretaps, the FBI began doing wiretaps of groups in Brooklyn and New York who were doing business with groups in the Midwest, in Olney, Illinois, and Temperance, Michigan, and a group of small towns in the Midwest, was that there was an entire group of Sicilian Mafia agents, people who worked directly for Gaetano Badalamenti and Tommaso Buscetta.
In Italy?
In Italy, but they were operating in little towns in the Midwest. These are people who had never been arrested before, had never been identified before as organized crime operatives. And at that point, that came as a revelation to law enforcement authorities.
Is this a whole new family, so to speak, of the Mafia?
Well, these people have been here, some as long as 20 years.
Connected with families that are already identified and known, using family in the sense it's used in the Mafia? These
people are connected with Sicilian families rather than with American families. And I think we have to make a distinction. There's a certain group of people who came over 20 and 25 years ago, born in Sicily, now working for the American organized crime families, the Bonanno family being the principal one. The group that I'm talking about, the group that was operating in the Midwest, was not working for an American family. They were working directly for a major Sicilian mafia family headed by Gaetano Badalamenti, who is now under arrest in Madrid, Spain, and we are attempting to extradite him to the United States.
What businesses do you allege these people are involved in apart from heroin?
Insofar as it relates to the United States, the principal connection that we've found so far is in the heroin business. However, on the Italian side, they are charging involvement in all forms of racketeering, extortion, murder, gambling, just a full range of organized crime activities. It's too early to tell yet whether, in fact, there are additional connections beyond just the heroin trade as between the Sicilian mafia and the American version of it.
If this goes the way you hope and any charges brought here are upheld and people convicted or extradited deported to Italy, what impact is this going to have on organized crime in this country?
Well, I think it will have a substantial impact on it. We, meaning law enforcement, had a very good picture of the way traditional organized crime, American organized crime, is arrayed throughout the country through Joe Valachi and Jimmy Fradiano and many witnesses who have come forward and laid out the organizational structure of organized crime in the United States. What we did not have, and has now been supplied to us, and is a tremendous benefit, is that same kind of picture of the Sicilian mafia. Who are the families, who are involved, what businesses are they involved in, what connections do they make? And Buscetta was right at the very top of the mafia organization. So his information is of enormous value to us.
Well, Mr. Giuliani, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure
Jim?
to be here.
Jim?
Recently, the FBI rounded up a number of people and charged them with being part of an elaborate heroin distribution network in America. For some of the suspects, small-town pizza parlors were their cover. And as Brian Ross reports tonight in this special segment, the pizza connection is a sophisticated, elaborate scheme that resembles an espionage operation by an enemy country.
This is central Illinois farm country, hundreds of miles south of Chicago. Around here, once the corn is harvested and shipped out on Conrail, there's usually not that much to talk about until springtime. But this year, in the town of Paris, Illinois, there's a lot to talk about. The man everyone knows as Joe the Pizza Man, Giuseppe Vitale, who has lived here quietly with his family, has been identified by the FBI as a mafia mole from Italy, a man in the pizza business, but also in the heroin business, allegedly sent here to this remote farm town 11 years ago by his mafia bosses in Sicily. 2 hours away, in Olney, Illinois, another Joe the Pizza Man, Giuseppe Trupiano, who the FBI says is also a mafia mole, allegedly sent here to open a pizza parlor, raise a family, and blend in so that when orders came from Sicily, he could quietly slip away to help smuggle in huge shipments of heroin and then move the heroin to dealers in the big cities. United States Attorney Rudolph Giuliani of New York.
I'd see them as foreign counterintelligence agents. They were working for the Sicilian mafia. As best we can tell, they thought that they would increase their ability to conceal themselves by going to small towns rather than operating in big cities where you have big city police departments and large contingents of FBI and DEA agents who are sensitive to looking for drug dealers.
The mafia agents who were sent to the Middle West all came from this one town in the mountains of Sicily, Cinisi, and according to the FBI, were all hand-picked relatives of the mafia boss here, Gaetano Badalamenti, who is now under arrest in New York. The men from these quiet streets established a reputation as the most ruthless and violent mafia criminals in Sicily, killing off entire rival factions to take over the business of shipping heroin to the United States, the mafia's most lucrative racket. The men from Cinisi came from the small town and moved to small towns in this country, but there was nothing small town nor small time about the way they set up their business here, establishing contacts on Wall Street and here in Congress. NBC News has found that at least 6 members of Congress, for reasons that are not known, introduced these private immigration bills to help get the alleged Sicilian mafia figures into the country in the late 1960s. None of these bills passed, but they were introduced. Sponsors included Senator Charles Percy of Illinois, who introduced this Senate bill on behalf of one of the Sicilians, Pietro Alfano, now charged with playing a major role in the mafia heroin business. Senator Percy would not talk about the bill, but a spokesman said the senator was asked to introduce the bill by constituents, whose names the senator cannot recall. Once in the country, the Sicilians appeared to have done their heroin dealing for more than 10 years before American authorities caught on to them. These are FBI surveillance pictures taken outside a bakery in New York City that authorities say was another one of the Sicilian mafia fronts. FBI agents who watched the Sicilians said the heroin and the millions of dollars in profits from heroin were often carried around in plain brown grocery bags, and that in many cases, within hours of leaving here, the cash in the grocery bags was delivered to 2 big Wall Street brokerage houses and then transferred to Switzerland. Prosecutor Giuliani says his investigation almost fell apart when one of the brokerage houses, E.F. Hutton, told the Sicilians the FBI was asking questions.
By E.F. Hutton letting people know, it literally stopped our investigation. And if we had not gotten another break, and a couple of other breaks actually, to initiate the investigation all over again, I'm not sure we would ever have been able to eliminate these drug dealers.
A spokesman for Hutton says the FBI did not make it clear that Hutton was not supposed to tell the Sicilians about the investigation. Federal authorities say they don't know whether they found all the alleged mafia moles sent here from Sicily. Joe the Pizza Man in Olney, Illinois, and 28 other alleged mafia agents have pleaded not guilty and will go on trial next year, charged with running the biggest heroin smuggling ring in this country's history. Brian Ross, NBC News, Olney, Illinois.
You rolling? That last guy is a questionable defendant in the pizza connection. Sorry, I blew your ears out. Judge Pierre Laval just came in. Again, be careful with that subject. May not be a defendant.
What do you want? Is he getting in your way, Tony? That's good. Yeah, if you want.
If you like it, you got.
You're not a bad-looking guy. If it wasn't for your face, man, you'd be really good at
It's just the paraphernalia.
If we could ask you just to back off a little bit, we're going to start the press conference. There'll be plenty of opportunity afterwards to take pictures.
This case continues the offensive against organized crime drug dealing. Yesterday's arrests and charges reveal another heroin operation run by Sicilian immigrants using pizza parlors as a front for trafficking in large quantities of drugs. So far, 16 defendants have been charged, 14 of them already arrested. During the arrests, in excess of $1.6 million in cash has been seized, over 8 pounds of heroin, 2 pounds of cocaine, 26 guns, and a very expensive hoard of jewelry. The boss of this heroin distribution network, Anthony Aiello, is also the owner of a number of pizza parlors and a restaurant in the New York area. Aiello and his wife, Elizabeth, own Tony's Pizza Parlor at 125th Street, here in Manhattan, the Cafe Aiello in Queens, 2 pizza parlors on Pitkin Avenue in Brooklyn, and other pizza parlors throughout the metropolitan area. The investigation commenced over a year ago in July 1983, when a New York City detective working for the Drug Enforcement Task Force in an undercover capacity purchased 39 grams of heroin for $8,000. The purchase was made at Tony's Pizza Parlor from Rosetta Palmer, an employee who worked behind the counter. From that point on, the other undercover agent became a regular customer at Tony's Pizza Parlor, not for pizza, but for drugs. Overall, he made 10 separate purchases, the last being on October 30, 1984. The amounts varied, the smallest being 15 grams, the largest 140 grams. Overall, the undercover agent purchased approximately a half kilogram of heroin and paid $189,300. The investigation revealed the structure of this organization. Anthony Aiello is the boss. He is alleged to be a member of the Sicilian faction of the Bonanno crime family. In fact, after the arrest in April of 1984 in the Badalamenti case of a large number of members of the Catalano or Sicilian faction of the Bonanno family, there is evidence to suggest that Aiello and his group had already begun to fill the void. One of the customers of the Catalano faction, Louis Guarino, now a defendant arrested in this case, a distributor of heroin both in New York and in Washington, D.C., soon after the Badalamenti arrests, began to make purchases from Aiello's organization. Much of the organizational structure of the pizza and heroin businesses runs on parallel tracks. Aiello is in charge. Filippo Gambina is Aiello's second in command, and Giuseppe Giusto served as Gambina's principal lieutenant. Aiello, Gambino, and Giusto all immigrated to the United States from Sicily. Giusto immigrated as recently as 1978. Aiello's wife, Elizabeth Aiello, was Giusto's sponsor. She claimed in immigration documents, in an affidavit in fact, that she would employ Giusto as a manager of Tony's Pizza Parlor. Rosetta Palmer, the counterwoman at Tony's Pizza Parlor, and Raymond Boyd, the cook, both allegedly also played significant roles in the heroin distribution business. Palmer often sold the drugs hand-to-hand to the undercover agent, and Boyd assisted in transporting and distributing heroin. During the course of the investigation, in fact in August of 1983, in the kitchen of Tony's Pizza Parlor, Giuseppe Giusto gave the undercover agent a price list for heroin to aid him in his future purchases. As the affidavit points out, the price list contained the following information: an eighth of a kilogram of heroin, $30,000, a fourth of a kilo, $55,000, a half, $110,000, and 1 kilo, $215,000. Although Aiello's organization dealt principally in heroin, they also allegedly sold cocaine over the counter at Tony's Pizza Parlor. On October 7, 1984, the agents first picked up a telephone call from an individual who identified himself as Tommy, obviously a potential drug customer. Electronic surveillance revealed that Tommy was seeking to purchase what he described as girl or cocaine rather than boy or heroin. According to the affidavit, the surveillance established that Giusto and Gambina supplied the cocaine to Rosetta Palmer, who in turn sold them to Tommy and 2 others at Tony's Pizza Parlor. The agents observed the 3 customers leave Tony's Pizza Parlor, followed them as they entered a cab, and arrested all 3 of them 7 blocks south of the Pizza Parlor in Harlem. The 3 people arrested were all from Baltimore, Maryland, and were found in possession of 2 plastic bags containing a pound and a quarter of cocaine, which it is alleged they purchased for $35,000. The 3 are Thomas Williams, Tamira Stanfield, and Michelle Ford, and they were arrested on November 7. The Pizza Parlor was the primary location for sales although drugs were also sold in other locations, including in various parts of Queens. The principal focal point for meetings with Aiello and his principal operators was the Cafe Aiello in Queens, which also served as a meeting point and a place for meetings in the Badalamenti Pizza Connection case. Over the past several months, there has been one big organized crime case after another. For those who remember the Korean War, there was a time when the United States forces became frustrated because no matter how great the casualties inflicted on the enemy, it appeared that more and more kept replacing them. Sometimes in the war against organized crime and drugs, that same kind of frustration can begin to take hold, but it must be avoided. This is a war that can be won if we do not rest on our accomplishments, but rather redouble our efforts. I am convinced it can be won because I know personally the men and women who are fighting this war on the front lines. They are brave, creative, honest, dedicated, and absolutely committed. John Maltz, who is in charge of the Joint Task Force under the leadership of Bruce Jensen, is an outstanding leader. He and the DEA agents, the New York City Police Department officers, the New York State Police, and the others who work with him have here put together an excellent example of how working together they can uncover and rip apart those organizations who make millions selling poison. Agents of the IRS Albany office also participated in this investigation and, as usual, contributed a great deal to its overall success. In my office, the case was handled by Assistant United States Attorney Ed Little, who did a magnificent job working on this case throughout. Of the recent election campaign, there was frequent reference to a statement attributed to President Eisenhower that the single New York City police officers, IRS agents, state police, and assistant U.S. attorneys and district attorneys, it may take more time, and it will take.
Between our department and the state and federal law enforcement agencies. The arrests of these defendants are part of a sustained and coordinated attack on all levels of illegal drug activity, ranging from the Pressure Point 2 project focusing on street sales in the Harlem area to the extensive investigation of sophisticated heroin and cocaine distribution operations. Working with the state and federal agencies, we intend to keep a full-court press on all levels of drug trade and look forward to the arrest of additional major drug traffickers. I'd like to read a telegram from Representative Charles Rangel, who was informed of this arrest, and he was elated because of the effects it has in the Harlem area. He states, quote, "I would like to offer you my support and congratulations for today's very important arrest. I think it shows an increased effort on the part of the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force in stemming the traffic and distribution of heroin in New York and throughout the nation. I am particularly encouraged and delighted that the arrest prevented a large amount of heroin from being distributed in Harlem." Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know what the overall impact will be with respect to the total amount of trafficking in drugs in New York City. I think it's safe to say that there's been an impact on this particular operation in Harlem.
Can you estimate about how much heroin is coming into the city every year?
Well, it's estimated that there is approximately 4,000 pounds of heroin consumed in the United States annually. It's further estimated that approximately 40% of the heroin addicts reside here in the city of New York. You can figure the mathematics out from there.
These people freshly under arrest, how high or low are they in the hierarchy?
I think they're very substantial drug traffickers, particularly heroin traffickers. How high are they in the hierarchy?
Were they brought over here specifically for a purpose?
Oh, I don't know that answer, sir.
What about the other pizza parlors in Brooklyn and other parts of the city? Are they still in operation, and do you have reason to believe that they are also places from which heroin is being sold?
Well, obviously, the pizza parlor on West 125th Street was a focal point of drug trafficking in this operation. The extent to which the other pizza parlors are involved is under investigation at this time.
How many pizza parlors altogether does Aiello run or have control of in this operation?
My understanding is that there are 4.
Is this operation connected at all to the other pizza parlor bust that you had?
Only peripherally, sir. Only peripherally.
Is this part of the Bonanno family?
Well, one of the individuals involved here is connected with the Bonanno family.
Who's that?
Aiello, sir. Or yes. No, maybe, let me take that back. It's Guarino, sir. Louis Guarino.
Specifically, how much of a debt will this cause in drug trafficking, this type of stuff?
Well, I don't know. That question was just posed earlier, and I think the dent will be in terms of the effects on this particular operation as opposed to the overall drug traffic in the city of New York.
But won't there be other soldiers to take their place?
I'm sure there will. And,
It'll continue.
well, unfortunately, that's correct, but so also will our efforts.
So that the person who wants the heroin will probably have no trouble at all.
Well, I think the people that were purchasing drugs from this particular operation will now have a problem. Whether or not they'll find new sources, in all probability they will. But that will not deter us from continuing our efforts to combat this problem.
You got a long, long fight ahead of you?
Yes, sir.
What's the status on the extradition of Bichetti and Baldamente?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
What is the status on the extradition of Baldamente and Bichetti?
It's in the process, but I'm hesitant at this point to make any comment on
How
that
did
issue.
Aiello get away? He's not under arrest, I take it.
Well, I don't know if he got away or just wasn't there when the arrest went down. The fact of the matter is he just wasn't at his known location when the arrest went down. I'm sure he knows he's being sought, and I'm confident we will apprehend him.
I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand Mr. Giuliani. The Cafe Aiello, you said, was a meeting place for this operation, but I thought I also heard you say that it was a meeting place for the earlier Pizza Connection operation.
That's absolutely correct. It was a place that was used often as a meeting place for Catalano and the people who were involved in the Pizza Connection case. And there are affidavits that have been filed in court that are public, in which the Cafe Aiello was identified as one of the frequent meeting places for Mr. Catalano, Ganci, the people who were involved in that case.
Would that not indicate that Aiello was a part of...
Well, it actually goes beyond that. During the course of that investigation, Mr. Ganci, who was Catalano's principal lieutenant and the person who actually was out front doing most of the drug dealing for him, met with Mr. Aiello. There were several surveil meetings between the two of them, including meetings at the Cafe Aiello.
So there are clear, tight links between the April arrest and this arrest?
Well, yes, there are very substantial links. Aiello was in fact a suspect in that case. He was a subject and picked up on wiretaps and electronic surveillance in that case. They are both members of the same overall crime family. They both operated in a very similar way in the sense that they brought in people from Sicily, Giusto being brought in just in 1978 in order to operate their business.
Is Aiello any connection with the 11 so-called heads of the Bonanno family who were united in connection there?
I'm sorry.
October 24th last.
Well, that was the Colombo family. Those were the heads of the Colombo crime family. No, the connections that exist are between Aiello and some of the defendants in the Pizza Connection case that goes back to April of 1984, principally with an individual named Ganci, who was Catalano's lieutenant.
Mr. Giuliani, could you elaborate a bit on Mr. Guarino's role in the Bonanno family as a kind of a link with the different parts of the Sicilian faction?
Well, Mr. Guarino was a customer. Originally, he was a customer of Lorenzo DeVardo, who was a defendant in the Pizza Connection case, and a Sicilian, and someone who was connected with Mr. Catalano. After those arrests, Guarino began to look for others from whom he could buy drugs, and he started to arrange purchases with various people who worked for Aiello. He is alleged to be a supplier not only in the New York area. He lives both at Howard Beach and in Marlboro, New York, but also in Washington, D.C.
Is Mr. Giuliani, of the 11 order elected here, how many are imports from Sicily?
The vast majority of them, I can't tell you the exact number, Milton, the vast majority of them are people who were born in Sicily and came into the United States within the last 10 or 15 years.
For a specific purpose.
Well, I can't tell you exactly what the purpose is. In Giusto's case, the claim was that he was coming in to work in the pizza business. In fact, the evidence here suggests, and alleges that he was working just as heavily in the heroin distribution business.
Wouldn't they find the local town?
Well, if you go back to Joe Bonanno's book, which I don't recommend for any other purpose, but maybe this one, you'll see that he was very concerned back in 1964 and 65 and 66 that they would not be able, that his family would not be able to find local talent, as you put it, and therefore that it was necessary to import people from Sicily who would be part of their tradition. And Salvatore Catalano, for example, came into the United States at that point and became a part of his family. And I think that there are a significant number of people who came over the last decade or so from Sicily to fill out the depleting ranks of these organized crime families.
So Americans are being shut out of jobs.
These are the exact kind of jobs that you'd want to shut Americans out of, if we can do it.
A question about the guns. Were there any other activities this gang was involved in aside from drug trafficking? Were they involved in stick-ups, robberies, anything else? And where do those furs come from?
I think I have to leave you to draw those inferences. All we're charging them with, which is a pretty substantial charge, about as substantial as we have under the law, is with running a continuing criminal enterprise, which could subject them to life imprisonment. Now, further investigation of what you see here could reveal that they were engaged in other kinds of criminal activity, but at this point, I would just be speculating if I said that.
New York City banks, laundromats, for this kind of money?
I can't say that in this investigation that came up, although that's something else that we'll have to continue to look into. That certainly happened in the Pizza Connection case. $26 million was laundered through brokerage houses, E.F. Hutton and Merrill Lynch. And that's a pattern that they use, but I can't say that it happened in this case.
How long was this operation going on?
Well, the investigation has been going on for over a year. I can't tell you exactly how long this operation was going on. Usually when DEA or the police department first finds out about it, it's been going on for some time. So you can assume that it's been going on for a period of time.
And they didn't slow up one bit after the April arrest for the first Pizza Connection case. I mean, you think
no, a number. If you look at the undercover purchases and the evidence, if anything, things might have gotten a little heavier for them after that.
You mean that their drug sales were heavier because they got business from from the people who have been shut out of the previous?
Well, at least there was no diminution in their business, and you could argue that there was an increase in it after those arrests.
This business then didn't start after the Catalano case.
Oh,
This was an ongoing
That's
prior
right.
to
This goes
and
back,
after.
I mean, the first undercover buy was in late July of 1983, and the Catalano case was in April of 1984. So this was going on well before, and as your question points out, it was going on after that case was brought.
What's your estimate of total sales by this ring on an annual basis?
I don't have an estimate. It's a very substantial operation, selling substantial amount of heroin and some cocaine, but it's hard to say. And basically their retail outlet was right in the middle of Harlem. So and they had people coming in from as far away as Baltimore, Maryland, to buy from them. So obviously this is an operation with a lot of tentacles.
Did this spread to other states like the Catalano, or did this basically just stay in
there's
New
evidence
York?
that there were people who were going to supply drugs in Washington, D.C., or did supply drugs in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, other places outside New York, which is very typical. I think one of the things that is not understood is that New York is a focal point for heroin, and therefore whatever success we can have in breaking up heroin operations here in New York is going to assist most of the rest of the country, including most of the East Coast, so that it's to the benefit of the rest of the country if we increase our emphasis here. It helps not just our city, but the other cities that are affected by the drugs that come through New York.
But were they using the same transport methods? In other words, bringing it into a small town in a van to Milton, Wisconsin, and then bringing it to New York, or was it coming to New York and distributed from here?
Well, from what this case reveals and what we know of it, the drugs were coming into New York. They were being stashed in some of these locations that from which a great deal of this
jewelry and other things have been discovered in drugs and then sold. I can't tell you that it was following the same pattern that, in that respect, that the Pizza Connection case followed with operations in the Midwest.
But today in the Pizza Connection drug trial, a man federal prosecutors call a major heroin trafficker pleaded guilty to a minor charge and then walked away a free man. Alec Roberts has this exclusive report.
Vincenzo Randazzo was accused by the U.S. Attorney's Office of helping to run the biggest heroin conspiracy in American history, smuggling $1.6 billion worth of the drug from Sicily and Brazil into the United States, and laundering hundreds of millions of dollars. Today, he left federal court a free man. Were you involved in heroin dealings with your uncle?
I've never been involved with, even my uncle. I never will. And also, according to the testimony, my uncle was no person involved with the drug.
Randazzo was charged with 21 other alleged mafia bigwigs, including his uncle, Gaetano Badalamenti, in the so-called Pizza Connection case. But the government agreed to dismiss his heroin indictment and instead allowed him to plead guilty to submitting a false name on his passport. In court, Randazzo attorney Lawrence Schoenfeld said the agreement amounted to recognition by the government that they believe he committed no other crime other than violation of immigration laws. But Assistant U.S. Attorney Louis Freeh vehemently denied that, claiming Randazzo was an agent of his uncle, Gaetano Badalamenti, the lead defendant in the Pizza Connection case. Federal Judge Pierre Laval then sentenced Randazzo to the 26 months he already served in jail on $4 million bail.
The government obviously evaluated their case, saw the evidence or the lack of evidence against Mr. Randazzo and perhaps against some others in the case, and realized that they had made a mistake.
The U.S. attorney made reference to the fact that Italy is seeking to extradite Randazzo on the heroin charges. But his lawyer says that since the U.S. extradited him from Switzerland, he can't be extradited on the same charges again. The plea is a blow to U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani, who has dramatized the issue of drugs, most recently going undercover to purchase crack. Giuliani, when asked to comment today by the Independent News, declined, saying the case was ongoing.
I can only say that I think it remarkable that Mr. Giuliani was the first to go onto television and in the newspapers when this case first broke 2.5 years ago. Now that Mr. Randazzo has been exonerated and the charges against him have been dismissed, and they were dismissed completely, Mr. Giuliani apparently doesn't see fit to report that to the press.
The Independent News has learned that Randazzo isn't the only heroin trafficker being allowed to cop a plea. Lorenzo DeVardo will also have his racketeering indictment dismissed in return for a guilty plea to a gun possession charge. Now, both of these men could have received up to 20 years in prison on the heroin charges that they faced, and the pleas raise questions about the strength of the U.S. Attorney's case.
Yeah, good. If I can't remember what's on. As I believe, ready?
Yes, sir. Everybody ready?
As I believe most of you already know, Tommaso Buscetta was returned to the United States last evening on December 20, 1984, pursuant to an extradition order of the Republic of Italy. The extradition order was obtained under the Mutual Assistance Treaty between the United States and Italy, which was ratified by the United States in July of 1984. Mr. Buscetta is presently in federal custody. All appropriate security precautions are being taken to protect him. Mr. Buscetta, as I'm sure almost everyone now knows through the revelations that have occurred in Italy, has been cooperating for some time with Italian authorities. He was originally arrested in Brazil on Italian charges and on charges from the United States. Based on an agreement between the Italian government and the United States government, which was reached in July of this year, we agreed that we would withdraw our charges, and in essence take a back seat to the Italian government so that they could extradite Buscetta to Italy quickly. At the same time, as part of that arrangement, the Italian government agreed to permit us to expedite our extradition of Badalamenti, since both governments were interested in the extradition of both of these individuals. And due to the very close cooperation between the two governments, we've now been able to achieve all of our purposes. Badalamenti has been extradited to the United States to stand trial in the so-called Pizza Connection case. Buscetta
was sent to Italy first. He cooperated fully with the Italian authorities. It was part of an agreement between the two governments that he would cooperate and be made available to both governments, and now he's been sent to the United States in order to be debriefed and in order for us to have the benefit of his information concerning organized crime activities in the United States.
What do you hope to learn from him?
Well, his revelations about the Sicilian Mafia have been really unprecedented. He has done for Italian authorities what Joe Valachi did for American authorities back in the early 1960s. He's revealed the entire structure of the Sicilian Mafia, the key people who run it, how they interact with each other, and he also gave them information about how the Sicilian Mafia operates internationally, including the United States. We have had assistant United States attorneys talk to him, meet with him, and get information from him in a general way over in Italy, but he's never been debriefed from the point of view of pointing his attention toward just American activities. So that's really what the purpose of the debriefings that will take place over the next couple of months really is, to accomplish that.
Do you think the information that you hope to get from him, do you think that will help break the back of the American underworld?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that his information is certainly very valuable and very important to us. It probably, however, was and will continue to be more valuable to the Italian authorities. After all, he spent most of his time in Italy. He spent some time in the United States, but he hasn't really been in the United States for any extended period of time since the very early part of the 70s, over a decade ago. He has a good deal of knowledge from the international point of view about what goes on here, but if you look at the entire gross amount of information available to him, it would make sense that the largest percentage of that would deal with Italy, and some of it would deal with the United States. And it's very valuable and important, but I think on a scale it would not be as significant and as substantial on the American side as on the Sicilian side. The second thing is we have gone further here in the United States in cracking open organized crime before Buscetta than really had been the case in Italy. Remember the Pizza Connection case, in which we believe he would have relevant information, is a case that was made long before he ever cooperated. I mean, it was made without him.
Do you expect him to shed some more light on the Pizza Connection?
Sure, we expect that he would be able to shed substantial light on that case, as well as develop other cases and provide intelligence to us. But the point I'm making is that Buscetta, it wasn't necessary to have Buscetta in order to, in essence, crack open the connection between the American mob and the Sicilian Mafia. Badalamenti, who was alleged to be one of the leaders of the Sicilian Mafia, was indicted in the Pizza Connection case, arrested in Madrid before Buscetta cooperated. And that was based on independent evidence having nothing to do with Buscetta.
Mr. Giuliani, you made a comparison with Mr. Buscetta and Joe Valachi. Would Mr. Buscetta occupy that kind of rung in the hierarchy, or was he further up?
Buscetta was a more significant member of the Sicilian Mafia than my understanding of Joe Valachi's position in the American organized crime structure. Valachi was actually, I believe, only a soldier in the Genovese family. Now, the reason why I say they're similar, however, is they both occupy the role of the first person to really break through. Valachi, despite the fact that he was not at the upper levels of the Genovese family, had substantial knowledge about the organizational structure of American organized crime. The boss, the underboss, the capos, the consiglieres, how they operate, how the 24 families interact with each other. That was enormous, the American organized crime families.
Why do you think Mr. Buscetta is cooperating?
You know, that's never an easy question to answer. There are 100 reasons for why someone cooperates or why someone decides not to cooperate. All I can tell you is what has been reported publicly, and a large segment of this has to do with the fact that members of his family were murdered, and that he believed that his family was in jeopardy no matter what he did, and therefore he didn't really have too much of a choice from his point of view. That's what's been reported. I can't tell you if that is absolutely accurate, and I can't tell you whether there aren't other motivations. There probably are.
Is the reason for last night's or early this morning's arraignment out of Eastern District because of the 1973 indictment out of Eastern District?
Yes. The reason for all of the secrecy surrounding his coming into the United States and all of the secrecy about when he was coming in and how he would be brought in and where he would go after he was brought in is not because we want it to be secret. We would prefer to have all of you see it, observe it, and be part of it.
However, this man is in jeopardy. He is testifying. He testified in Italy, and he is offering information against some of the most dangerous people in the world. And it is incumbent upon the United States government, the FBI, DEA, the marshals, the U.S. attorney's offices, to take extraordinary security precautions with him, which is what I would categorize his precautions as, extraordinary, above and beyond what we would do even in the case of a usual witness against organized crime.
Do you think he's willing to sing to get revenge?
Oh, I wouldn't put it that way. I think that I think the reasons why people cooperate with law enforcement are very, very complex, and you have to really know an individual to be able to state all the reasons why someone might be cooperating. The public reason given so far centers on danger to his family, damage that's been done to his family. I'm sure there are other reasons, but I'd be speculating if I went beyond that.
Why was he brought in now? Is there any significance to the timing?
No significance beyond the fact that it took a long time for the Italian government, as you would imagine, given all the information that he had about the structure of the Sicilian Mafia, to debrief him, to get all of the information that they wanted from him for their purposes. He has accounted for at least 360 arrests in Italy over the course of the last several months, involving some of the most significant leaders of the Sicilian Mafia. But as I said before, that is only the most immediate benefit that he's been to the Italian authorities. They've been able to turn his information into 370 arrests. The second benefit is long-term, in the same way Valachi was a benefit to us, and that is they now know in detail the structure of the organized crime families in Sicily, how they relate to the rest of Italy, and how they relate to internationally.
Is he going to testify against Badalamenti in a grand jury?
I can't comment on his on whether he's going to testify in a grand jury or what would happen in a grand jury, or even whether he would testify at trial. For the next several months, he will be kept in secret, hopefully under very, very extreme security conditions, and the process will be what I think I would just generally categorize as debriefing, so that we gather the intelligence that gives us a chance to assess exactly what he can do in the way of direct prosecutions, and then exactly what he can do in the way of supplying us with additional information about organized crime.
Can you be more specific, Mr. Giuliani, about this debriefing here in the United States over the next several months, what the format will be, whether he'll appear before any congressional committees, whether it'll be all law enforcement?
I would say that for a period of several months at least, all of it will be done confidentially and not in public. That would be the normal course that you would follow with almost any witness who was cooperating against dangerous people, and when you're dealing with someone at this magnitude, it's probably even more important that it be done that way, so that I would not expect anything public involving him for some time, when we're talking not weeks but months.
What is Badalamente's current status?
Badalamente is under indictment. He's the principal defendant in the Pizza Connection case. He's residing at the Metropolitan Correction Center, being held on no bail under the new law passed by President Reagan, and signed by President Reagan and passed by the Congress on October 12 of last year, of this year. And he is awaiting trial in the case that is entitled, actually, United States versus Badalamente. His is the first name, and 37 other defendants follow it, most of whom are alleged to be members of either the Sicilian Mafia or the Bonanno crime family.
You've made it clear that most of the information that Buscetta has to offer is of significance in the main to the Italian authorities, but you've also indicated that there is some significance to the United States. Just without getting into specifics, just how significant? How do we gauge that?
I did that because I don't want to mislead people into thinking that he will have the same level and quantity of information regarding the United States as he's had with regard to Italy. After all, the man spent most of his life in Italy, not in the United States. So it stands to reason that he would have more information about Italy than the United States. By the same token, given the level at which he operated, which is essentially the international mafia, he has very valuable information concerning activities in the United States. Just developing in greater detail the connections between the mafia in Sicily and organized crime in the United States is very valuable to us. The Pizza Connection case has given us a great deal of intelligence about that, but it comes from our having to peer in through surveillance, through electronic devices, through witnesses that know one fact or another fact. He is a kind of overall witness who can give a great deal of information about exactly how they interreacted, and that's very valuable to us.
This international network, we know that it must encompass more than, say, Sicily and the United States. What would be some of the main capitals of the international mafia network?
Maybe the best way to illustrate that is on the day in which we made the arrests in the Badalamenti Pizza Connection case back in April, people were arrested all over the United States, in many major cities of the United States. There were arrests in Switzerland, Spain, Italy. There was activity and assistance from Brazil, and I probably missed a few countries. But that investigation spanned all of those countries and involved significant activity in each one of those countries.
Is there ever a link between, say, European part of the network, Asian part of the network, Latin part of the network? Does that happen?
Well,
on a regular basis, that can be.
If you would, the best way I think to describe it is that the heroin trade is international in scope. The connection between the Sicilian Mafia and American organized crime, in particular the Bonanno family, went something like this. The Sicilian Mafia handled the drugs from the point at which the crop came out of the ground until the point at which it got into the United States. They were the ones who made the contacts in Asia. It was their organization that brought the unprocessed crop and poppy and eventually made into heroin to Italy or to Western Europe, because they used labs in not only in Sicily but in Milan and in other countries in Western Europe. It was processed there. Sometimes it was then brought to Brazil. Sometimes it was then brought into the United States directly. They used various entry points, New York being the most frequent, but not the sole entry point. Once the drugs safely got across the border into the United States in kilogram quantities, multi-kilogram quantities, they were transacting amounts like 20, 30, 40 kilos. Then it would be turned over, in essence sold to American organized crime. This particular case involves allegations directed at the Catalano faction of the Bonanno family. They would, in essence, buy the drugs from the Sicilian Mafia, and then they would take care of the rest of the business, getting it cut further, selling it to distributors, selling it to redistributors, and then eventually down into the street.
Have you got a sense of a dollar figure of the international mafia's business dealings as it pertains to the U.S.?
I don't. I can tell you what the indictment adds up to. The indictment charges $1.7 billion in drugs brought into the United States. And there are separate charges in that same indictment involving the laundering of $28 million through Swiss bank accounts, allegedly for paying some of the heroin debts that had been accrued by the American mob people to the Sicilian mob people.
You made the pizza connection without any help from Buscetta.
That's correct. The Pizza Connection case was made before Buscetta cooperated and before any of these discussions actually began. And that's why, and I say that to show that we begin with a very substantial body of intelligence as to how the Sicilian Mafia operates and how American organized crime is operating. And he will help, but he was a breakthrough for the Italians. For us, he is a help.
Yeah, he's just going to reconfirm things that you had already known.
Well, I'm sure he'll tell us things that we don't know, that didn't come up on the tapes, and that's where the debriefing will show.
William French Smith was quoted last month as saying that his revelations, Buscetta's revelations, were the single most devastating assault on the mafia. You wouldn't reach that far.
Well, I would, internationally. It depends on, if you look at the mafia as an international organization, Buscetta is the most significant figure to come forward and to give information about the international operations of the mafia. To date, the people who have come forward have all been domestic. They've been significant but domestic. Valachi and Fradiano being the two most dramatic, Cantaloupes, all of those people. They've given us a very good picture of how the organized crime operates in the United States. But there has never been a person at the international level. And that is very significant to us. Maybe another way of putting it is, if we were totally successful in crushing the mafia in the United States, if you didn't also crush them in Italy, you would just have the ability to import people, as has happened, and was happening in the 60s and 70s, from Sicily to the United States, just to take up the work that the people in the United States were doing. So it's very, very important to us, even though the prosecutions may take place in Italy, it's very important to us that the Italian government is as successful as we are in crushing the mafia. Buscetta has made that possible for the Italian government, and that has an enormous impact for us internationally.
The mafia in the United States doesn't deal in any domestic narcotics trafficking, does it? It's all international, isn't it?
Oh, sure. The mafia is essentially heroin, and heroin all comes from overseas. Although, when I just said that, I probably have to put a little footnote in to say that recently we've had organized crime, LCN, La Cosa Nostra cases, in which they were dealing also in cocaine, which seems to me to be more than just accidental. I think there's a trend now in which they are moving into cocaine trafficking a bit more than they were in before.
Federal law enforcement officials are celebrating what they consider to be a major victory in their war against organized crime. A former head of the Sicilian Mafia and 16 other reputed organized crime figures convicted yesterday of running one of the biggest heroin smuggling rings ever uncovered. The New York trial took 17 months to complete at a cost of several $1 million. The defendants had been accused of smuggling more than $1.5 billion worth of drugs into the United States alone. The trial was marred by violence. One of the defendants was critically wounded in an apparent mob hit in Manhattan earlier this year. Last December, a second was found murdered outside a Brooklyn bakery. Prosecutors say the ring spanned several countries, and the convictions are a major blow to organized crime.
I think the impact on the mafia of these cases and the convictions today have been devastating. The organization, if this continues, and it should continue, the efforts by the DEA and the FBI and the Customs Service and the U.S. Attorney's offices, if it continues, there's not going to be a mafia.
Prosecutors say they'll sue the convicted defendants to recover $5 million in illegally obtained assets. There may be a strike soon involving thousands of employees at Hawaii's 13 major...
I really made it then. In that case, I really made it. Thank you.
Yes, good. Right. Yeah, good move.
Jenny Young, Associate U.S. Attorney representing Rudy Giuliani, the Chief of Detectives Colangelo, Pat Dugan, representing the case of grand jury, Lieutenant Carroll of the Manhattan South Detective Task Force, Cy Vance, who worked on this case, Mike Chikaski, the head of the Rackets Bureau. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this case is that it's the result of a very close cooperation initially between the New York City Police Department and the FBI. When these shootings occurred, the police on the beat brought in detectives who recognized that this was the victim was a defendant in the Pizza Connection case. Immediately got in touch with the FBI, and together they worked this case and really solved it in very fast fashion, and there was close cooperation between the United States Attorney's Office and the District Attorney's Office and the presentation of this case to the grand jury. 3 men have been indicted today for the shooting of a defendant in the Pizza Connection trial on the Greenwich Village Street on February 11, 1987. Salvatore Spatola, Giuseppe Amico, and Philip Ragosta are charged with conspiracy in the second degree and attempted murder in the second degree for the shooting of Pietro Alfano. At the time he was shot, Alfano was on trial in the multi-defendant federal narcotics prosecution known as the Pizza Connection case. Philip Ragosta is separately charged with attempted murder in the second degree and assault in the first degree for shooting Ronald Price, an innocent bystander. The Office of the District Attorney and the United States Attorney's Office worked together on the investigation. Assistant District Attorney Patrick Dugan of the Rackets Bureau presented the case to the grand jury. He was assisted by Assistant District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr., Assistant United States Attorneys Louis Free and Alfred Pavlis were in charge of the investigation for the United States Attorney's Office and were sworn in as Special Assistant District Attorneys. The indictment charges that Spatola, through an intermediary, contacted Amico in September of 1986 and offered him $40,000 to kill Alfano. Amico enlisted Ragosta to help him with the murder, offering a share of the money to be received. Ragosta in turn recruited Frank Bavosa to assist him in the murder.
Amico, Ragosta, and Bavosa began surveilling Alfano. They traveled to Alfano's home in the state of Illinois in November and December of 1986 in their efforts to locate him. On February 11, 1987, the three waited outside the federal courthouse for Alfano, followed him to 6th Avenue between 9th and 10th Street. Approximately 5 p.m., Ragosa and Bavosa ran behind Alfano, armed with pistols furnished by Spatola. Ragosta shot Alfano several times, then shot Ronald Price, an innocent bystander. And again, I want to thank the New York City Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for their very complete, thorough cooperation and investigation in this case. Sir Thomas Shear, who's in charge of the New York office of the FBI, supervised the investigation. For the FBI, is from Queens, Amico 29, and Ragosta 32 are from Brooklyn. And as you know, attempted murder in the second degree is a Class B felony. Each of these offenses carry a maximum sentence of 25 years in state prison.
Mr. Morgenthau, in the first part of the indictment, Spatola asked the man if he knew anyone who could teach him a lesson. Can you tell us what the lesson was? Why were they angry at Alfano?
There are a number of theories, but I don't speculate about theories.
You haven't established what the problem was that led to this.
That would be evidence that would come out at the trial.
Mr. Morgenthau, Mr. Young, Mr. Shear, just a clarification on federal charges that have already been brought in this case. Bavosa was charged in federal court in New Jersey, I believe, as was Patsy Conte, charged in the Southern District.
Let me see if I can give you a synopsis of what the federal charges are.
The federal charges haven't been dropped, in other words.
The charges against had been brought against Messrs. Amico, Ragosta, and Bavosa on a federal charge brought in the Southern District of New York. Those charges are still pending. The case against Frank Bavosa, however, was arraigned in New Jersey based on the federal charges brought in New York. A fellow named DeGrazia also was arrested on a federal complaint, and he has pled guilty. I guess he pled guilty on April 16th in federal court. But just let me reiterate again what a magnificent job the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the New York City Police Department have done here, is investigating this matter and bringing it to the point we are. And it's another fine example of law enforcement working together jointly, the District Attorney's Office, our office, the two investigative agencies, for the people of the city.
The charges against Mr. Conte, have those been dropped? Or
Charges brought against Conte and Polera have been dismissed.
The individual who was shot along with Alfano, Ronald Price, was he an associate of Alfano?
No, he was just an innocent bystander.
He was an innocent bystander?
Yeah, innocent bystander, just happened to be on the street at the time.
why wasn't Bavosa charged in this case?
That case is being handled in New Jersey under 18 U.S.C. 1952. That's a case that they're handling over there. But the three defendants, Spatola, Amico, and Ragosta, will be tried here.
I guess, Mr. Mulligar, if you could for us, tell us how this case, the charges against these men in state court differ from the federal charges.
Well, here they're charged for attempted murder. And that's a relatively simple charge, but it carries a maximum sentence of 25 years.
So once again, if you could, in your own words, for the people at home, explain what the difference. These men have been arrested.
Yeah, they tried to commit a murder on the streets of New York, and the three of them are charged with that murder. And that's Spatola was the middleman who recruited Amico, who in turn recruited Ragosta. Ragosta was the actual shooter.
What's the difference between these charges and the federal charges?
Well, under New York state law, you can charge people directly with murder.
The other one is murder for hire. This is just for murder. So
that's right. Attempted murder, yeah.
Mr. Shear, the charges against Mr. Conte there were charges also brought in the Eastern District, if I recall. Are those charges still standing?
I'll refer that question to,
No.
So dismissed.
The charge against Connie in the Eastern District were dismissed as well.
And why were the charges against Conti dismissed for lack of evidence?
No, this is an ongoing investigation, and at this point, I don't think I can comment about the reasons for the dismissal. That should be stressed. This is an ongoing joint investigation, now being conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, the District Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Police Department. So there's not a lot we can discuss at this moment, other than what's set forth in the documents that.
Yeah, the other thing, you see, the attempted murder of Price would not be covered by any federal statute.
Mr. Chair, as long as we have the opportunity to talk to you, I remember a news conference where there were guns displayed that were taken from Mr. Conti's home, and there were charges leveled against Mr. Conti, I believe, that involved possession of those guns. Am I wrong? Is that?
no, you're not wrong. The
And
charges against Mr. Conti at this particular time have been dropped. And we're really precluded from talking in any detail about what we plan to do, but let me reassure you that our investigation with the New York City Police Department and with the federal and local prosecutors hasn't stopped. But we can't talk about it any further.
One thing we didn't mention was the payment to the shooters was $40,000. I mean, that was the agreed payment. Actually, $5,000 plus expenses we paid, but that was the total agreement.
Were these three in custody, or were they arrested this morning?
No, they were in custody, and Amico and Ragusta will be arraigned today. Spatola's in transit.
I think I missed something. Frank Barbosa, what is his disposition, having been one of the individuals who allegedly...
His case is going to be handled by the United States Attorney's Office in New Jersey, because there are other charges involving him in New Jersey.
Did he cooperate in bringing about this particular indictment?
Well, I don't want to comment on that, but there are pending charges. He has a maximum exposure of 40 years in federal prison. So his case is being handled by the United States Attorney in New Jersey.
He's been charged under the murder for hire statute, federal statute there, as well as conspiracy to murder Alfano.
do you know the condition of Mr. Alfano?
I'm sorry?
Do you know the current condition of Mr. Alfano by any chance? The current condition of Mr. Alfano is medical
He's
condition.
paralyzed from the waist down.
He's in the Federal Correctional Institute in Springfield, Illinois, in a hospital.
It's a very nice institution, I understand.
The best money can buy.
Yeah.
Paralyzed? He's
And
paralyzed. in the waist.
paralyzed, but Mr. Price is recovering. He will be all right, physically all right.
And Alfano's case was severed from Peter?
No. He was convicted.
Do you
And he's
remember
a
how many
federal
years he
hospital,
was-
a
Alfano
federal
received
prison system
in the
hospital
conviction?
in Springfield.
Do you remember how many years Alfano received?
He hasn't been sentenced
He
yet,
hasn't
but he
been
has
sentenced.
been convicted.
Right.
The sentencing in the pizza case is on June 2. June 2.
Yeah, none of the defendants have been sentenced in this
Thank
case.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you know, this is Dick Martin and Louis Free, who were two of the assistant United States attorneys who tried the case, and Bob Stewart and Bob Bucknam and Bob Stutman of DEA, and Andy McCarthy and Mike Fahey, and Marvin Smilan of the New York Post.
Charles Rooney. Get Rooney over.
Charlie Rooney from the F. Is everybody ready? No? Yes? I'll say something very briefly, and then you ask any questions that you want, and they'll answer them. This today is really a very great victory for law enforcement, international law enforcement, in the effort against the mafia all throughout the world. All the principal defendants in this case were convicted. 18 of 19 defendants overall were convicted. It's an outstanding result. We couldn't have hoped for anything better, and it is a tremendous victory for the effort against the mafia and the effort to crush them both in the United States and with all the foreign countries that helped us, which include the Italian government, the government of Switzerland, Spain, Brazil, Turkey, and I'm sure I've excluded some in the list. But the amount of cooperation internationally, which was unheard of 8 or 10 years ago, played a material part in the result that was obtained today in court. Also, the tremendous talent, dedication, and conscientiousness of the people that you see standing next to me played a very, very important role in it. It is impossible to describe to you what it's like to try a case for 17 months, and since I've never done it, I can't describe it to you, but they can. They were able to do it as successfully as I've ever seen it done in the history of this courthouse, and I just have tremendous admiration for Louis Freeh and Dick Martin and Bob Stewart and Bob Bucknam and Andy McCarthy, who tried the case, and then for all of the agencies and agents who work with them, Bob Stutman of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Charlie Rooney is here, and I wish Tom Scheer and Jules Bonavolante and all the agents that participated in this could be here, because they played a very, very important role in pulling this together from the beginning. The United States Customs Service, the Internal Revenue Service, the New York City Police Department, and I'm sure I've missed a few of those agencies too. This has been a tremendous team effort, and it is a very, very significant victory. There have been a number, and it's hard to quantify them or to qualify them, but I can't think of one that's been more significant than this one ever in the international effort to end the mafia. Louis, do you want to say something?
No, just on behalf of all the agencies that weren't mentioned. We had police officers at trial testifying from Italy and Spain and Brazil, and this was an effort which began in 1980 and continued successfully up until this very moment. And we hope and we believe that this will be a continuing effort from here on in.
Could I just ask also Bob Stewart, Dick and Louis and Bob Bucknam and Andy McCarthy are assistant United States attorneys in this United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. Bob Stewart is in charge of the strike force in Newark and has participated in this case all during the investigatory stage and all during the trial stage, and has been just an invaluable part of the trial team. So I'd like to ask Bob Stewart to say something, and then Bob Stutman.
Well, as Louis said, it's something that started many, many years ago and involved so many people and so many agencies over so many years. And everyone has worked so very, very hard to get the result that we got today. And we think that this is the beginning of something very, very good for law enforcement and something very, very bad for organized crime.
Bob Stutman is the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration in New York, and I'd like to ask Bob.
One of the first questions that comes up at every press conference that Mr. Giuliani and I are at is, what difference does this case make as far as drugs go? Clearly, those of us who are in the field know that traditional organized crime is controlling a lesser and lesser part of the heroin traffic in the United States. That is happening because of cases like this. This case is going to make a big difference, and every time traditional organized crime takes a step back, it makes our job easier, and we are going to continue to see truly a change in trafficking patterns for drugs in this country. There are very few places in this country that this can happen, and it is under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani that it happened, and it will continue to happen. Thank you.
You know, I think 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, nobody would have believed it was possible to convict the head of the Sicilian Mafia and have him sitting in the Metropolitan Correction Center, as well as the head of a major portion of a American organized crime family, and as many people as have been convicted in this case. So it really is remarkable what these people have done.
Mr. Giuliani, even though the so-called traditional mafia might have been hurt by this, what difference does it make in the long run when other groups are so quickly taking?
Well, you know, I get asked that question a lot. What difference does it make? And it really is kind of silly. I'll tell you why it's silly. What do you propose that we do? Just let them do it? Of course, there are always going to be criminals. There are always going to be crime groups. It's been that way since the beginning of humanity, and it's probably going to be that way until the end, if there is an end. But decent people like this who work very hard keep it under control. And that's precisely what they've been able to do in a way that I don't think any other group has been able to do in the history of this country. That's a remarkable thing. And I think it does have a material effect on the heroin market and the heroin trafficking in the city. That doesn't mean that all problems are gone and there isn't heroin and there aren't heroin problems. But these are very masterful criminals who have had long careers committing numerous crimes, some of whom have never been convicted before, which is an outrage to decent, civilized citizens. It finally has been done. It's been done in the right way, with all of their rights protected, to a fair trial, and a 17-month trial. Couldn't have been fairer, couldn't have bent over more backwards to give these people every single civilized benefit you could give them. They've now, just about every single one of them, been convicted, and they're sitting where they belong in prison.
How many of the defendants were American citizens and how many Italian citizens?
Well, several of them were extradited from across the waters. Gaetano Badalamenti was extradited here. I think of the defendants who were here, there's probably about 4 or 5 who were citizens. Several of them are resident aliens, and several of them are here illegally.
Given the tremendous manpower commitment that this case involved, what is the likelihood of a case of this magnitude ever being brought again?
Well, you want to hear their answer? Their answer was no problem. Their answer was no problem. Well, there is a slight problem, but if it has to be done again, it'll be done again.
Do you see any legal problems, though, in bringing a case like this? I mean, it was said that...
But, you know, there were many people who, from the very beginning of this case, and I go back to the investigatory stage, that didn't think that this case could be done. I probably heard that more often than I heard that it could be done, except from Louis and Dick and the people that you see standing here, who believed in it and put it together when lots of people thought that it couldn't be done. And now they've gotten it to the stage where every single major figure has been convicted, and convicted overwhelmingly. So I think they proved that it can be done.
Can you estimate how much this cost? How much this prosecution cost the government?
I can't estimate that, Marvin. I mean, it cost a tremendous amount of money.
Tens of millions of dollars?
Oh, I don't know if it's tens of millions of dollars. It cost a lot more money than you have or I have. Probably would have been chicken feed to Ivan Boesky, but... But it's certainly worth it. Right. It's certainly worth it, given the results that were obtained.
What's going to happen as far as seizing the assets that you believe were illegally obtained? How much money are you looking at in terms of the assets? And in layman's terms, what's going to happen?
I think the value of the assets is in excess of $5 million. And what will probably happen is, since Judge LaValle determined that the jury was overburdened to continue to determine that issue, what I think will happen is that we'll proceed in a civil context and go after the assets, and I'm sure that we'll get those as well.
And can I ask Mr. Giuliani, in terms of, as your colleagues have mentioned, having an impact on heroin, can you be more specific? Will the price rise?
Well, I think the impact has already occurred. These people were arrested some time ago, and to the extent that there's been disruption to the heroin market, that's already happened. So that I don't think that their conviction is the key event. They were arrested a long time ago, and this operation was brought down in that sense a long time ago. And whatever lingering involvement they had in the heroin trafficking now hopefully will also end.
The defense attorneys were saying that they felt that...
I just wanted to add that 3 years ago, traditional organized crime in New York controlled about in excess of 90% of the heroin available. Today, at best, they are controlling half.
Let me ask you that from the second. Stop, because you were walking up. Can you...
2 to 3 years ago, traditional organized crime in this city was controlling about 90% of the heroin available. Today they are controlling, there's argument, but the top figure is half or less. So absolutely, cases like this have made a difference. In 1969, when traditional organized crime and the French Connection controlled virtually all of the heroin in this country, there were 900,000 heroin addicts. Today, there are about 500,000 heroin addicts. So law enforcement does work. Will it ever completely stop the problem? No, but it will make a difference.
You know, there are some things that happened during this trial that Louis and Dick remind me of that really are historical and that have a tremendous impact on organized crime and on the Mafia's ability to do the things they used to do in the past. I don't ever remember a member of the Sicilian Mafia testifying in court under oath and acknowledging the fact that there is such a thing, that he was a member of it for many years, and how it was structured. Mr. Buscetta testified for the United States government, for the Italian government. Mr. Contorno testified. The myth that the vow of omerta still exists is really just a myth. It doesn't exist any longer. It's been violated on this side of the Atlantic, that side of the Atlantic, and it's an organization that the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration and the United States Customs Services have done an absolutely terrific job of infiltrating.
Mr. Giuliani, now that whatever prohibitions...
I don't think that we have crippled the Sicilian Mafia. I think this case is one of many efforts that will cripple the Sicilian Mafia, including the tremendous efforts on the part of the Italian government, of which we were a beneficiary.
Now that prohibitions on your speaking out on some matters of the case are lifted,
Prohibition?
there was, well, whatever gag order was imposed at any point, and now that you're going to launch the effort that'll probably make the Giuliani pizza chain the largest ever after the government seizes these assets, what can you say about the homicide and attempted homicide that happened during this case, as to what your people's analysis of what it meant was?
I don't think we can comment on it yet. That despite the fact that there's now a verdict in this case, and I'm more than happy to comment on this case, those are still charges that are pending, and I think we have to be pretty careful as to what we say about that.
What about what the defense lawyer said, that there was a war in that courtroom and that it was their claim that it was the American...
Dick, why don't you say something about the defense lawyer?
Well, that defense theory was presented to the jury. The jury was presented with the theory that what this case was about was a war between the Badalamenti good mafia and the American bad mafia. And the jury never asked a single question before convicting virtually everybody in the Badalamenti family. And to the extent that you can take that as a lesson and apply it to the situation that you're discussing, and also apply it to the defense theory and the defendant's lawyer's theory that you've heard, I think it would be appropriate. I think that there is little more that is accurate about what they said outside the courtroom than what they said inside the courtroom.
How do you explain the murders? What are the thoughts?
I think the evidence will explain the murders, and that will come out in another courtroom.
Dick, could you talk a little bit about the pressures that there were to bring down the case early, to bust it at the first sign of heroin?
Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
I think that everybody agreed that once we had determined that this was an international conspiracy, that the real interest was to take it to as far as we possibly could. And that involved a tremendous effort by the people who were working here. It spread out to the Midwest. The core was always New York, New Jersey, Louis Freeh and Bob Stewart from the beginning. It spread out to the Midwest. We got the assistance of the U.S. attorneys there. And when it became international, we took it there, and we got their assistance.
Well, wasn't there a point early on where somebody wanted to make arrests fairly soon?
Until we found Gaetano Badalamenti, until we got the ex-head of the Mafia of Sicily, until we found the person who was shipping truckloads of heroin to the United States, we weren't going to stop. When we did find him, we did, and we brought it down.
Let me just say something. There was pressure to bring down the case even before Badalamenti was identified and before he was arrested, due to Louis Freeh, Bob Stewart, Tom Shear at the FBI, and I'm sure there are some people that I'm not mentioning. There were others. They had the courage to keep going with the case at times when others were putting on pressure to bring it down. And that takes a lot of courage in law enforcement to do that, because if you turn out to be wrong, you may end up with nothing and then everybody gets blamed. And in government, it's often very hard to find people who are willing to take risks in order to achieve a courageous result. Louis Freeh and Tom Shear, Bob Stewart, and the people you see standing here are those kinds of people. And had it gone the other way, there would have been loads of people that would have been standing around saying, "I told you so." So I think it's appropriate to single them out.
Could Mr. Stutman tell us a little bit more about the context of this, in terms of the drug situation? How does this case, 1.6 billion worth of heroin over 10 years, I gather, compared to other major drug cases that the U.S. has prosecuted, how much of a dent in the actual heroin trade did this particular ring represent?
As far as heroin cases goes, this is, if not the largest, certainly one of the 2 or 3 largest in the country.
Ever?
Yes. I think what is as important, however, is it shows a continuing penchant for law enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York and in New York in general to go after the organizations that control the traffic as organizations. And I think as Mr. Giuliani said, to spend the time and the money to take them down as organizations, because as this gentleman asked before, if you take down any given individual, then certainly that individual's place is probably replaced fairly soon. When you take down an organization, you disrupt the ties and the flow of drugs, and you do make a difference. And that's why this particular case is so important, because it shows that organizations as a whole can be taken down.
Does anybody know whether, of all of you, whether this is in fact the second largest, say, after the Pizza Connection? Or
I mean, I don't know if you're talking resale, wholesale, or...
This is the Pizza Connection.
This is the
French
Pizza
Connection or...
French Connection was actually a very small amount of drugs. What was it,
So-
30 pounds?
44 kilograms of
So
heroin.
what other case would be larger than this in terms of
It was, the French Connection case was a very famous case, but the amount of heroin that was actually seized and interrupted was 44 kilos, and the organization was like 4 or 5 people.
Mr. Giuliani, you said
so what other case would be bigger than this?
So I would, Bob points out that this case involves a metric ton of heroin. 18 people convicted, others who have pled guilty. There really is no comparison between the cases.
You said that this did
I mean, I don't think it is unfair to say that I can't recall a drug case of this dimension, international dimension, that's ever been tried before in the history of the United States. There's never been a longer criminal trial in the history of the Southern District of New York that I can recall. There certainly has never been a drug case of this dimension, and they are to be congratulated for the way in which they handled it and the result that we achieved.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the impact that this is having on the organized crime groups with connection? You say it has had a major impact, but what exactly?
Well, I can remember when all these cases started at approximately the same time. 10 years, was it 10 years ago? A year and a half ago or whenever, and I can remember hearing and reading from a lot of people that these cases were unrealistic, we weren't going to win. Somebody once did a commentary that they were boring, and how could the jury follow it, and on various cases, and actors appeared in some of them, and there was a lot of fun about them. I think the impact on the mafia of these cases and the convictions today have been devastating. The organization, if this continues, and it should continue, the efforts by the DEA and the FBI and the Customs Service and the U.S. Attorney's offices, if it continues, there's not going to be a mafia 5 or 10 years from now. There's no reason to believe that will happen if we don't continue these efforts, but if we continue these efforts, this organization doesn't have to be the international and national organization that it became. I also think there was another big myth, and that is that the mafia wasn't involved in drug trafficking. There used to be movies about that, if you recall. That's a joke. I mean, this case proves beyond a reasonable doubt it was a joke. It should have been a joke to any sensible person when you realize that Lucky Luciano began his criminal career convicted of selling heroin, which goes back a number of decades. It's always been nonsense, and it continues to be, and now I think it's been proven in court.
Biggest fraud perpetrated on the American public about crime was The Godfather.
Mr. Freeman, if you could maybe fill us in on, Mr. Kennedy alleged that the 12th juror that was removed was not threatened about this case in particular. Do you have anything?
The judge, exercising his discretion under the rule, made a finding and removed that juror. That's all I'm really permitted to say.
So you don't know anything about what the threat was about?
I didn't say that.
According to Mr. Kennedy, the juror contacted him and said she had wanted to stay on the case.
I can't comment on that.
You know, for all the heroin that was involved in this case, very little was actually seized. Do you feel after